Up in the sky. It's a bird.
It's a plane.
It's your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
It's here. It's time. Luke Cage Season 2 is back. And Jake, I am ready to dive in.
Yeah, I'm ready to rock. This is something I've been looking forward to. I'm excited to talk about it.
And I think we mentioned this when we dished on Jessica Jones. I'm totally in favor of Netflix and Marvel doing the BBC model, which is you do the new season when the new season is ready. You don't necessarily have to produce something every 10 months, which I'm in favor of. But at the same time, I'm an impatient fellow. So it's been a long 2 years waiting for this.
Well, and to dip my toe briefly into another area of the nerd realm, I'll confess that probably my favorite TV show that's being produced currently is, and I admit it, Doctor Who. And so I say with that BBC model, like, I'm right there with you. Like, I live in that space of just constant impatience and yet being grateful for the thing that is making me impatient. So, I mean, I guess I'd take this any day over a Fox model where it's like, we're going to show you 6 episodes in the middle of February and then 1 episode a month for the rest of the year and call it season 2. So, this works for me.
Exactly. And it's a whole lot easier to track just kind of how seasons go than with what network TV's junk is doing anymore anyway. But I also think, and maybe we can just kind of dive straight into this, but the Luke Cage thing is also just interesting because the whole Marvel Defenders bit on Netflix is there's a lot of hot and there's a lot of cold and there isn't a lot of middle ground too. So it's like when I want to dive into some more, I only want a specific kind. I don't just want to do the ones that are always there because it's not always worth your time if I can just kind of be snobby about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair because this is on topic, I feel, so stop me if I'm wandering too much. But back a few years ago when they announced,
you know what, Jake, you wander, you do it, you wander, man.
Yeah, like it's ever stopped me before. Yeah, no, I a few years back when they announced this collaboration with Netflix and Marvel, I was really psyched for it, and I looked at the 4 properties that they chose to do. And I really felt like, there wasn't going to be anything wrong. It was going to be perfect start to finish. It hasn't been exactly that. It has been, the highs have been even higher than I'd hoped. And I think the lows have been much lower than I'd feared. I haven't made a lot of secret of my just utter contempt and disappointment with the Iron Fist show. Because I had such, and part of that is just failed expectations. I expected so much because, in the last 15 years or so, that character has been fleshed out so wonderfully and given such a really, really fun world to play with, and it could have been so much more than it was. And so, I think the term you're searching for when describing the Iron Cage or the Iron Fist Netflix show is pooped the bed. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty spot on, and it just, I think I've said this before, but this will be my last word on it because I don't want that to overshadow Luke Cage here. But anytime you make a kung fu story that the climactic showdown is between your all-powerful master of kung fu and a businessman with a gun, you've probably missed the mark somewhere conceptually.
Swing and a miss.
Yeah, like I just can't believe somebody put that up there on storyboard and they're like, all right, we're paying this much for choreography and we're paying this much and we're going to have our guy work out so that he looks like he could be a kung fu master. And oh, did anyone get the gun? Do we have a prop gun? Are we ready for the final episode? And it went through. That's amazing to me. So clearly this is not a Netflix can do no wrong situation. And, part of what makes Netflix so magical right now is that whole, that throw it against the wall and see if it sticks mentality. Like, I'm not sure there's anything Netflix won't greenlight. And that's given us some pretty cool stuff.
The Netflix model in and of itself is a massive monster, and especially since they don't publish their ratings or their viewings,
Yes.
it's really difficult to kind of track things. And so I think you're spot on. They green light anything, and they'll throw large amounts of money at darn near anything just so they can win the bidding war and have it, because they want the real estate, they want to own the market. But what's interesting is in the last 12 to 14 months is how quickly they will pull the plug on something that they clearly were happy to throw money at less than a year ago. And that's just kind of crazy to see, but it's their model. It works. And their Netflix, they're sitting at the top of the mountain for at least another year or two until the Fox Disney thing comes through. So we'll see what happens. But if you're still with us, but this is your first episode, this is the Watching Comics Podcast. My name is Mitch. Jake is the other guy, and we are here to tell you everything that is important to know regarding the comic book world coming to your screens, TV and movies and whatnot. And today we're dishing on the first few episodes of Luke Cage season 2, because it is up on Netflix and it is here ready for us to be swimming in.
Yeah, this is it. And again, if you're new, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. We value you greatly, and thanks for giving us an outlet for this. So, yeah, Mitch, let's dive in. Let's, I don't know, where you want to start with this?
Okay, can I just say that I really enjoyed season 1 of Luke Cage, and I think it's safe to say that Luke Cage and Daredevil are kind of like number 2A, number 2B for where I would rank the Netflix Defender series. I think Jessica Jones is the best thing they've done, but because I just didn't think Daredevil season 2 lived up to quite as awesome as what the first season was. And so I'm interested to see what Luke Cage season 2 will do, because I felt like Luke Cage season 1 was pretty strong for the most part. So I guess my one gripe is that the first 3 episodes, which is really what we're talking about here, it wasn't until the second half of the 3rd episode where I felt like they finally could agree on a tone and an approach of how they were going to actually film the season and give us the information and the action sequences and how they're just going to kind of philosophically package that. The first 2.5 episodes were just kind of like, well, we've seen this in a popular movie. We've seen Edgar Wright do this. We've seen other people do this. So let's just kind of do this. And so tonally and pace wise, it just was much more, put your foot on the gas and then suddenly stop than it needed to be. And I don't want to quite call it herky jerky, because it wasn't just like quick and cut and quick and pull all the time. But man, the first 2.5 episodes, I wouldn't even call a slow build. It was just very, very disjointed. And you could see that the story was there. It just, the second half of the 3rd episode is where it finally caught to form. And I'm hoping that they kind of just tonally continue with that the rest of the way.
Yeah. So I'm so glad that you're saying this, because I actually, this is a big thought for me, so I'm going to try and break it down into smaller chunks and get through the whole episode with it, not just do like one 20-minute monologue and then you do the rest. I sat down and I think I'm not even going to be as generous as you, and maybe I should be. We've talked about that before. You're definitely the better person here. I think
that's for our viewers to decide. We'll send out a Twitter poll. Who's better, Jake or Mitch?
Boy, and there's just so many ways of breaking that down, right? I think I lose most of them, though. But I think that up until a certain point in episode 3, I was pretty ready to sit down here and say 3 episodes in, and I'm not really enjoying season 2.
Yes.
And I was trying to think.
I was kind of feeling that way too.
Yeah.
Keep going.
I was trying to think
digging this.
Well, I'm trying to grow as we do this. And so to our regular listeners, you'll know that one thing I mention offhandedly, but that is actually a legitimate thought process and growing process of mine as we've done this show and as we've grown into it, is I'm trying to be constructive in my criticism, and I'm trying not to go for shock value and what's going to get the most laughs, because I think that sort of carelessness is how we get people screaming into the oblivion for 16 hours a day about The Last Jedi, which, by the way, I loved. So come at me.
It's the second best Star Wars movie, and Rian Johnson is a masterful filmmaker, has been his whole career. Shut up, everyone else that's hating.
You know what? One day I'm going to talk Mitch into doing a Star Wars episode somehow on this show, and I'm going to tell you why I disagree with Mitch and actually think The Last Jedi is the best Star Wars movie. But moving on.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, right. Okay. But so I was really working through, as I finished up episode 3, how I was going to be constructive and kind about saying that I just don't like this. And then that final scene in episode 3 where Claire and Luke have it out. I think that scene pulled all through, and I'm not, we're going to get into this. I've still got some things that I'd like to see tightened up as we go forward with this season. But that scene pulled together those 3 episodes for me and really tightened the whole thing up and made it a totally different thing. And I that scene was so good, and it was so powerful, and it was so what this show is at its best moments. And it was just this perfect, I want to say 10-minute, 12-minute scene, this perfect 10 to 12 minutes of what Luke Cage is at its best. And it was focused, it was tight, it was well performed by 2 great actors, and it was complex, and it hit a variety of themes that are relevant and powerful, and it made me think, and I loved that scene. And if that is where we're headed with the next 10 episodes, then I renounce my sinful ways of the first 3 episodes and thinking that this wasn't going to be any good, and I'm ready to rock. But it's such a small sample size that I've still got a lot of concerns going forward. Is that fair?
I completely agree, because I think what you're getting at is the heart of the narrative, at least where we're sitting at right now with season 2, is Luke is on a road of discovery, whether he likes it or not, a discovery of either how monstrous he really is with his dark tendencies or how inherently heroic he is and wants to be. And Claire is the one that is supposed to be the objective person that shows him which tendencies need to take priority over others. She's the one that tells him the truth, that holds up that mirror and says, this, and this, because you're not thinking straight. And most of the time it works. But now, especially with the end of episode 2, kicking off into episode 3, her influence is waning with him, and it's going to be at the cost of his goodness, at least is what we're led to believe for now. So if that is the spine of the story, I agree. It's a wonderful way to handle the fantastical nature of the Luke Cage character while grounding it in humanity. But that does not address what we kind of alluded to earlier, which is just the overall structure of how they're filming the extra stories, the action sequences, how they do pacing, and all that sort of stuff. And so a lot of the mechanics still need to be cleared out. But man, can we just take a minute and say that I think maybe the most criminally under talked about and underrated concept of this entire Defenders universe, and I was tweeting about this earlier over the weekend, is Rosario Dawson herself. First of all, she's got ridiculous acting chops, incredibly versatile, and if you just take 5 minutes to peruse over her career and see some of the greatest hits of what she's done, the woman can do almost anything. And she has now crossed over, I think in a very good fashion. She's done this very well. She has crossed over as Claire Temple into 3 of the different story arcs of the Defenders universe, and has done it seamlessly, and has provided an emotional and humanistic core to everything that she does. And she still finds a way to surrender the scene to the people that need to be owning it, but also knows how to emotionally command when she really needs to amp it up. And I think she is the low-key MVP of the entire Defenders EU. And I just need to get that out there on the internet, because I don't know why more people aren't talking about her contributions to everything that's going on with the Netflix Marvel stuff.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And I think that there's so much to be said for, in any field, in any walk of life, in anything you do, there's so much to be said for that person that facilitates greatness in others, and does it. Gosh, I don't even know how to describe this, because I almost just said the phrase leads from the back, but I don't think that's accurate. There's just so much to be said for somebody who can, with humility and with quiet strength, take everyone around them and elevate what they're doing. And she has done that so consistently. She provided this bright spot in the otherwise not great Iron Fist. She has been Luke Cage's moral compass. She stitched up Jessica Jones in a single episode, as I recall. And she's been, the person that really was the sounding board for Matt Murdock to become Daredevil. And I think that her character has been so well used across all the different shows. And more importantly, her performance, like you said, has elevated the people around her. And this is in no way to take away from the people that she's working alongside and to say that they wouldn't be brilliant without her. But in that scene where she's talking with Luke at the end there, and I see her take the first steps into that depth, and I see Luke follow. And what it produces is hands down the best scene, maybe of Luke Cage seasons 1 or 2, and I think up to this point, season 1 was much better than season 2. But as far as just individual scenes, it was so good, man.
She's, if you go down the line and look at just the length of career and the credibility and the versatility and stuff that she brings out of most of these shows, outside of maybe like Alfre Woodward and David Tennant, she really is one of the more storied and decorated and all around talented individuals in these casts as well. So she's the one that can, when the time is right and when she's called upon, she's going to be able to amp it up to that level. And in the meantime, be able at a higher level than most other people deliver what is asked of her at the same time. She's masterful. And I think Rosario Dawson deserves a lot more credit for what she's doing in this extended universe. So let me ask you a question. Okay. Who is, and I'm not saying better actor or better actress, I'm just saying for the sake of the writing and how they're being portrayed in the series that they are on, because I feel like this is an apt comparison. Who is the better displayed character, Mariah Dillard or Kingpin?
I'm going to go with Kingpin on that. And this, again, like I always end up saying, this is not to take away from Mariah Dillard or Alfre Woodard's performance. But I think that Mariah Dillard exists in the shadow of Cottonmouth. And in our lead up to this, I promised Mitch that I wouldn't let the next several episodes of our show just be me bemoaning the loss of Cottonmouth in season 1.
Okay, so I felt like before we tread any further, I felt like this was probably going to go there. And so I do want to say like maybe one blanket statement and see if you agree or not, and then just kind of let you take the floor for a couple minutes on the Cottonmouth thing, and then we'll see if we can diverge the rest of the way. Because I feel like as good as Luke Cage has been, the one thing that has kept it, at least from where we're at right now in season 2, the one thing that has kept it from reaching Jessica Jones level of prestige TV is their treatment, and maybe I should say mistreatment, of Cottonmouth. I feel like they laid that to rest way too early, and Mariah Dillard's character is not weighty enough to handle the kind of clout and the kind of attention and the kind of characterization that Kingpin garnered in the first season of Daredevil. And so it feels like this entire time, like you said, she's not only under his shadow, but it's like, man, Alfre Woodard's doing the absolute best that she possibly can with this character. I'm just not buying this character being the one where the universe orbits around her for this long.
Yeah, I actually think that I crystallized some of my thoughts on Cottonmouth leading up to this recording that we're doing. I think that I'm going to try and keep it somewhat brief here, but I do think that this hangs over the entirety of Luke Cage, and I don't think we could afford to not address it. First of all, you've got that Cottonmouth is played by Mahershala Ali, who is not just a brilliant actor, but a brilliant actor that's sort of at what right now appears to be the zenith of his career. And that could go on for 10, 15, 20 more years. It could go on for 6 more weeks. God only knows in Hollywood.
We'll find out, because he's going to try to resurrect True Detective.
Right, exactly, right. And is that not the true mark of somebody's career, is whether they can, because anyway, that's funny, because I was going to make a McConaughey reference there right before you said that. But so I think that Cottonmouth, the reason I miss Cottonmouth so much is not just Mahershala Ali, although, Lord help me, it's in there. The reason I miss Cottonmouth so much is because in Cottonmouth, we had this very focused contrast between him and Luke and him and Mariah. And he seemed to be this character whose own complexity helped bring out everyone else's complexity, and you could juxtapose him against the people around him, and you could really draw so much out of them. And we talk about the support that you get from Rosario Dawson, and I think that on a bigger, more direct level in just this show, Cottonmouth was doing that for everyone around him. And the backstory of a character who didn't want to get into the life that he did, but now that he's here, he's going to do it. Contrasted with Mariah, who did want it but couldn't. Contrasted with Luke, who doesn't want to be here. He just wants to keep his head down. And you put all of that together, and it gave the first, what was he in, 6 or 7 episodes last season?
He's like half the season, and then he was gone.
Yeah, and it gave that first half of the season a very focused feeling that up until the point where Cottonmouth goes out, I felt like Luke Cage was gearing up to run against Jessica Jones for my favorite thing on Netflix. And I felt like it was in that. And again, Daredevil is excellent, and Kingpin is the tops for me. He's one of the best villains I've seen in any superhero media. But as a show, I was ready to say halfway through, Luke Cage is going to be even better. It had that unique style. It had its references down. It was trying to exist in this sort of retro space with the blaxploitation films of the 70s that inspired the character, but it was trying to move forward. And you had Luke, quoting these different characters from fiction and literature, and you had Cottonmouth through it all, not wanting to be who he was, but it was so good. And then, it really was becoming in the way that Jessica Jones, and I say this has to be my white guilt disclaimer, so I apologize to everyone. But as a straight white guy, there's certain experiences I'm never gonna get. So if I speak out of turn, I apologize. Don't be afraid to call me on that if we meet or if we talk or you're someone I know. That's not my intent. But it appears to me that Jessica Jones exists in this space where it takes the struggle of women in the era of the Me Too era and it fictionalizes it and it gives a voice to it, and in the same time grows beyond that and tells this very personal story. And Luke Cage seemed to be approaching that same space for African Americans or just in general non-white Americans. And it had this conflict brewing that was really leading into that. And then Mariah kills Cottonmouth. And I understand what they were going for, because everybody involved in that writing and in that decision has gone on the record about what they were trying to do was to psych the audience out, do something unexpected, kind of like when Game of Thrones kills Ned Stark, I think is what they were headed for.
And which I get, but at the same time, It's like, man, I- there's such a delicate balance between that concept of like, okay, we know that we need something like if you're just following an action movie formula, it's like every 5 pages, something needs to happen that's action oriented. Or like Brad Bird always says, the secret to my formula is every time something spectacular happens, something not spectacular has to happen right after or in the middle of it in order for it to balance out, like those sorts of things. And it's almost like they were following the paint by numbers and didn't allow their subjective grayness to come in and say like, wait. Could we be derailing this thing just because we said we wanted to have holy crap, did they just do that moment? It's like they wanted to have that episode 1 of House of Cards season 2 where they take what they thought it was going to be the main character of the season and just kill him in front of the bus. Like they wanted to do that for the sake of having internet credence almost and a binge watchability rather than just crafting the best narrative for the universe.
I think that nails it. I think you said what I'm approaching like 10 minutes trying to say in 30 seconds. And that's brilliant because at the end of the day, since the death of Cottonmouth, all of the things you could say criticizing this show boil down to a lack of direction. And it is not the place of anyone to say what the direction of Luke Cage should be. It's the place of the creators, and it's the place of the stars and the performers and the artists involved in it. I believe that really firmly, that it's the place of the artists to decide what direction it's going to go, and then the audience responds or they don't. But I didn't feel there was a direction since then. And these first 3 episodes of season 2, it's not that I need Mahershala Ali to walk out of the shadows and say, I'm not really dead. You know, what I need is a direction, and it doesn't have to be the same direction. It doesn't have to be a direction born out of that, but I don't feel in those first 3 episodes until the last scene, I don't feel a direction for this show. I feel a lot of generic ideas thrown into the thing and just shaken up to see what pops out. There's my thoughts. I'm going to try not to just harp on Cottonmouth and how much I miss him because he was such a fantastic villain, and we all get that. But that's my thoughts on it to try and summarize why I think the death of Cottonmouth was such a detriment to this show and is still felt 3 episodes into season 2.
So I feel like episode 3 solidified the ultimate direction. Like you said, we were lacking direction. I think episode 3 solidified the overall direction for Luke and Claire and what it means for Luke's internal journey going forward. I think clearly he's going to be going through this concept of like, am I dark or am I good? And how does my father play into that? And will it cost me my most treasured relationship with Claire? That's clearly where the rest of the season is going. The rest of the direction is let's pivot to the Bushmaster conversation now and say, okay, what do we think about the direction or possibly lack thereof of the season so far with Bushmaster coming onto the scene? Because clearly Bushmaster and Mariah are going to throw down. That's that's actually the main motivation for Bushmaster, even though the real reason Bushmaster is there from a conventional standpoint is because we need a villain for our hero. And Luke is part of the process of taking back Harlem. So if Bushmaster wants to be the number 1 Harlem guy and he wants to do it through organized crime, he has to dethrone Mariah. But part of the Mariah bit is that Luke is attached to this. Luke is going to be a problem. It's like the Joker in The Dark Knight. He goes to the bosses and say, we know what you all want. Let's work together to get rid of Batman first, and then we'll do our things respectively. So I ask you then, what do you make of the perceived direction or potentially lack thereof that we have with Bushmaster and what's going forward?
I guess I feel like it's a lack thereof. I don't mind Bushmaster, and certainly visually we've gotten some cool scenes out of him. He certainly allows them to use a different genre of music in their scenes. Sure. And this is a very, one thing I do want to compliment with this show is its use of soundtrack, not just to harken back to the 70s, but also to move forward and to, the use of soundtrack to flesh out this world and give Luke Cage its own unique feel is pretty cool, and I really enjoy it. I also feel like it's just a little bit on the nose that every time Bushmaster's on screen, somebody's doing a Bob Marley cover, and it's anyway, it's just a minor gripe.
I can't decide if it's too on the nose or if it's perfectly comic booky.
Yeah, and so that brings me to my question that Bushmaster has raised is, and I think I've asked this before, are we, and I really mean this as a question. This is, by the way, if I don't know what's coming through the microphone here, but if you're hearing explosions outside, don't worry. We're not coming to you from any other country. It's just the 4th of July weekend in my neighborhood.
Same here. There's a lot of popping going on outside of my window. So there you go.
We're
Happy
on
Independence
day
Day, everybody.
23 of the 4th of July, and it's July 1st. Hope none of my neighbors listen to this. But so I think that there's a legit question that I've been struggling through this year about superhero stories in all media, comic book, television, film, what have you. Do we need to escalate? Do we still need to escalate the struggle in a physical way with a new villain every time we tell a new story? Or
and see, I think that's or have we grown to something beyond that? Like,
yeah, and I don't even know that I want to use the word. As soon as I said grow, I regretted it because that implies that it's a superior way. I just are things changing in that direction where we can tell these stories, or we should tell these stories without saying, okay, and this time the bad guy's going to have these superpowers and it's going to really represent what's going on in the hero's head, because that's a tried and true way of doing a superhero story, and it works, and it's been done for 100 years for a reason. However, there has to be a point where I think some of these stories we can stop and say, there is no new physical threat. We're going to deal with the fallout of the last threat like we would on any other show.
So I think this harkens back to a couple of things that we touched on when we spoke about Jessica Jones season 2. Because I remember our first episode of Jessica Jones season 2, we talked about, like, we think there's not going to be a villain, and are we okay with that? And then ultimately we ended the season and went, you know what, this was a really good season. And they didn't have a stereotypical villain. But then I also found myself making comparisons to the TV show Dexter quite a bit, because Dexter feels like strangely applicable to this world of comic book TV shows, but at the same time, it's still so much of a unicorn compared to other formulaic TV. And this is the sense of, like, we have fleshed out comic book movies way more than we have fleshed out comic book TV, because comic book movies have existed far longer at a higher prestige level than comic book TV. Comic book TV at its highest levels prior to about 5 or 6 years ago was animated. And the weakest ones were the live action ones, ironically. And now we're starting to pivot the opposite way, finally. So here we are. And so I say this to say, like, Dexter followed this model of, because, and am I right? You're a Dexter watcher?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you know what I'm talking about here, because I love Dexter, but being an avid fan of the show, I have to be objective too. And the concept of Dexter was amazing. It was novel. It was an anti-hero. And we started following this formula of every season was going to be the threat of his identity being found out by more than likely a villain of some kind. But the villain came to him in a different type of form every single time, whether it be familial or whether it be professional or just random chance of a chance happening and a connection brewing there, those sorts of things. But it was strong for 4 seasons. The problem is the show was on for 7. And it's like they kept running out of creative and captivating ways to make that formula work. And I almost wonder if that is kind of a case study for comic book TV, because Jessica Jones didn't have a Kilgrave in season 2. Like we talked about, it was more of a system and a way of thinking and a stigma that she was fighting. But if done correctly, it can still hold up. And I felt like season 2 was like season 1 of Jessica Jones was like at a 9.9 and season 2 is like a 9.5. Like we're splitting hairs, the difference there. And so I almost wonder if there's more room for nuance like that as far as how we handle the villain bit in TV, much more so than in the movie world, when the movie famous debates on Twitter is, like who's got the better villain and blah, blah, blah. The villain was wrong with this movie. TV it's a longer game, man. It's a marathon, and you're buying in, and it's time you can't have back, and years you can't have back, and characters you're invested in. And I feel like there needs to be more care and more nuance and more intentionality there. So I answer your question with a whole lot of vagueness, other than the fact is I think that's a more viable question when we throw it into the cinematic world.
Well, and this is but I'm going to be honest that it's probably an unfair question of me to ask at this point in the show, 3 episodes in, because as you said, we asked that question in Jessica Jones season 2, and then it developed a whole certain way. And so maybe I need to just not ask this question until we wrap up Luke Cage. But I am looking at it, and I think it's pretty obvious that Bushmaster, I mean, he's got a code name, as opposed to, Jessica's mom was the code name they gave that character. Yeah. And so there's an actual villain here. There's a physical threat being set up. He's being introduced to us as a more stereotypical villain. And I think that there is an obvious path they're headed. And I just, sometimes when I was thinking about this, I started daydreaming about what if we stuck with the Mariah and Luke conflict, and what if we stuck with this idea, these ideas that were introduced in season 1, and we followed them to their conclusion rather than trying to escalate the physical conflict and then see what that does to the story. I don't know. To me, I think there's 2 ways that it can play out. You can have, on the one hand, you can do it 2 ways. You can follow the story and then create a physical conflict that plays into that effectively. So I think you referenced it already, but the best example of that is The Dark Knight, saving the Joker for movie 2. Or you can do it where you decide we need a better conflict, we need a new conflict, so we're going to put this in and then come up with a story that fits that. And I would say that's probably Superman: The Quest for Peace with Nuclear Man. Is the way that plays out, where you're kind of just saying, what's the biggest guy? How are we going to get somebody who punches harder than the last guy? All right, I guess we're going to need a conflict to go with this too, huh? You can either let the story develop the villain, and in that case, you get things like the Joker in The Dark Knight. You save him second, or you can try to find what's the bigger physical threat and cater a story around that, and you end up with Superman: The Quest for Peace. That was my last thing.
Totally. So that's a good way to do it. And I do love what they're doing with Bushmaster as far as what Bushmaster brings culturally to the show, because of if nothing else, I mean, again, we're white guys, and I get that. And I don't want to misspeak on the importance of representation in mainstream media, because it's such a big reason why Black Panther was a massive hit. Now, granted, Black Panther was a kick-ass movie, but it was a massive hit also because it was a big deal for Black people to be able to see a hero in that light, a comic book hero up on the big screen. And so Luke Cage is wonderfully indicative of the overall concept that Netflix has embraced, which is this concept of representation and equality matters. And Luke Cage is a wonderful salute to diversity and the African American community and what it means to grow up in this part of the country. And what I love as far as that is concerned is how that educates me, while it's still highly entertaining, while it's still allowing representation in a way that we should have been doing for decades ago and we're finally catching up to. So I love Luke Cage for championing that. And Bushmaster is deepening that, which I love. He's bringing extra culture, extra layer, extra context, extra history to this whole bit. And the accent is wonderful. The music shifting is wonderful. And everything that he's bringing to that whole arena, I think, is just good for entertainment value, but it's also good for why it matters to people. And so Luke Cage is continuing to deepen that. And I just feel like that needs to be spoken of, even if we can't go too deeply into it, because we're two people who don't know what it's like to be misrepresented, as awful as that sounds. So I love that concept of it. And there have been some killer killer moments visually and viscerally with Bushmaster so far. So I'm hoping that obviously they've put the eggs in that basket, that they invest it correctly, and it's really going to pay off as it goes on, because this concept of like he could be quasi-powerful like Luke Cage, enough to where he could at least take a bullet and heal over some time, which is kind of interesting. And I think that could hold some very interesting weight later on. So I'm more hopeful than I'm not for the concept of Bushmaster.
So you touched on something that I wanted to get to tonight. I wasn't sure how we'd segue it in, and this is more just a personal fascination of mine. As a white guy, just I am a honky. But I look at it.
You are the honkiest of honks.
Yes. I'm fascinated by, and I don't say this with any level of criticism, just as an observation, I'm fascinated that I had truly expected Luke Cage to capture this place culturally, sort of this vacant spot that was there for representation in the superhero world, that it didn't really, and then Black Panther stepped up and did. I'm not, now part of it could just be that Black Panther is just such a freaking good movie, and Luke Cage is kind of both a brilliant and then sometimes not as good show. But I am curious, do you have any thoughts on why this character that's from an entirely different continent captures that spot in a better way than a guy from New York does? Does that make sense as a question?
That's a great question. And my white person, uneducated answer may be as simple as the magic of the movies compared to the small screen. There's and we've talked about this before, and we just take it for granted because, like we said, Jake, we're white folks, and we just haven't had to it's whether we have opted for it or not, we are more privileged in a lot of different ways than we deserve to be, and that's just the reality of the situation. And just there's something to be said about a kid seeing a that looks like them on the big screen at the movie theater, and people embracing that and applauding it. And just the pictures of little girls dressing up as Wonder Woman to go see the Wonder Woman movie. I've talked about this before. I took my mom to go see Wonder Woman. My mom is, in her middies, and she wept at the scene where Wonder Woman leads the army into no man's land. And for all the reasons why people like Jamel Hill were buying out entire movie theaters in their hometown communities so Black elementary school kids could go and see Black Panther for free on the big screen because they didn't want underprivileged kids to miss this opportunity. I'm not saying that Luke Cage isn't important, because the wokeness and diversification, if I'm allowed to white boy say those words, the wokeness and diversification of mainstream TV is important. I do not aim to diminish that, but the big screen carries that spectacle. And just the whole first Superman movie in the 70s that came out, the tagline wasn't even about the movie. It was about the concept of "you will believe a man can fly." Like, they were just freaking selling you on inspiration. Well, it was white guy inspiration because it was Superman. So it's like that's the magic the movies carry. And so I think it may not be a more detailed. My limited vantage point, maybe just say, Jake, it may not be a detailed answer other than the fact that Black Panther is just a really, really cool character with an awesome suit, and the movies are special.
I think that's a really good answer, and it's probably the best that we're going to be able to come up with from an outsider's perspective. Any listeners who have any insight on that, I'm fascinated by it. And again, not as a negative thing. I think Black Panther is a phenomenal character and more than deserving of the praise he's gotten. I had personally, as a comic book fan, had kind of expected Luke Cage to fill that void. And so I'm just fascinated. Anyone who's got any insight into it, I'd love to hear it.
And there's obviously a lot of nuance there, but I love that Luke Cage is creating this world that's not only believable and visceral, but is 100% true to the identity of the socioeconomic commentary and racially, and empowering those who are putting the show together and starring in the show in every aspect in celebrating that kind of diversity. Netflix is leading the charge in that in so many different ways, in LGBTQ relations, in feminism, and all those sorts of things. That they are setting a new standard, and it's a breath of fresh air. So, Jake, before we go, let's just say this. Grade on a normal grading scale, grade the first 3 episodes, and then on a scale of 1 to 10, give us how optimistic you are for the rest of the season going through.
I'd say for the 3 episodes as a whole, or for each episode?
3 episodes as a whole.
Okay, because I think, let me say, I'm going to give it a B, because I actually think part of my biggest criticism would be, I think these 3 episodes could have been 1 episode. I think that you could have treated the first episode. First 2 episodes could have been 1 for sure. Yes. Well, and maybe this is because as soon as we finish recording, I'm going to go write a paper for grad school. Maybe I got it on my mind. But I think your first episode can in many ways be your thesis statement. And I think that that the arc that the first 3 episodes go through could have been the thesis statement for the rest of the show. Now, maybe I feel differently next week or the week after when we've seen more of it. But all in all, I'm going to say B, a solid B. It's better than the average thing I watch. Those last few minutes really elevated it. But there's certainly some room to take it into the area that I expect it can reach. For as far as my optimism, before those last few minutes, I'd have given you probably a 5 at best, because I really felt like we were wandering there. But after those last 10 minutes, I'm going to say I'm at a 7. I think there's a lot, those minutes give me a lot of hope that maybe even though there's some pacing issues, because pacing issues are so common in so many forms of art and so many forms of fiction, books, movies, TV, it doesn't matter. You're always going to pace things a little worse than you could. And with hindsight, you'll look back and say, I could have told this quicker. So a pacing issue I can live with. But I thought this was something else. Those last 10 minutes give me a lot of hope. It's just a pacing issue for the beginning of the show, and that given a few more episodes, we're going to move into a different arena where it's going to get truly great. So, yeah, I'm at a 7, and I expect – is it weird? I'd say I'm at a 7, and I'm at a 9 on my 7, that's going to go up from a 7 to an 8. That's a weird way to say it, but I'm optimistic that my optimism will improve.
JP's go to 11. So I am, I'm pretty much right there with you. Definitely a solid B, and on the grade of the first 3 episodes for me. And I'm hovering in that 5 to 8 range for anticipation, and I just can't nail myself down because the first 3 episodes were so hot and cold. So I feel like I can just say 5 to 8 ish. And I'm there. So we'll call that good. We'll come at you in the following weeks with 2 more episodes on season 2, just to kind of wrap everything up and see how the whole thing stacks up in the Defenders Netflix universe. But Luke Cage, go check it out. Hit us up on Twitter at WatchComicsPod. That's comics with an X, at Watch Comics Pod. We want to hear what you see season 2 of Luke Cage thus far, and we want to hear your hot takes on do you miss Cottonmouth or not, and we also want to hear about just any other general stuff that you have on your mind regarding the comic book lore on our screens, because there's always something to debate about, and there's always a take that someone is wrong about that we can correct them on. So anyway, we'll hit you up next week with some more Luke Cage. Check us out at watchingcomics.com and subscribe, rate, and review, because it's the nice thing to do.
Yeah. It's been great, everybody. We hope to see you next week.